I don't know how much you watch mainstream horror movies, but the Conjuring series was pretty darn good. If you watch a lot of mainstream horror movies, you'll know that there's some cheesy stuff out there. If I mean, there's a ton of it, but the Conjuring series was actually very, very compelling, and there's some truth behind some of the stories that came from it. Nightmare Files did a video about some of these truths, and we're gonna react to it today. Make sure to head on over to Nightmare Files' channel and subscribe, guys. And if you like reaction videos, subscribe to me too. Let's get into this story.
The Conjuring 1 and 2 were very successful films that followed past cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren that involved haunted houses in the 1970s. The Conjuring 3 will once again follow a case of the Warrens.
I watched all of them.
But this one takes place in the 80s about America's first "The Devil Made Me Do It" court case. The case of Arne Johnson murdering Alan Bono.
Alan Bono, you might get some volume fluctuation here, guys. I apologize if it gets loud and low, but I'm gonna mess with the volume as we go.
Right from the start.
We were contacted by Father Dennis, who at that time was pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Brookfield, Tony. And the call came in, and he spoke about a young boy who he had been trying to help. Now, you would watch David,
young boy,
and he would be doodling, you know, drawing or something like that, and he'd be concentrating on what he was doing. And then he would look up, and it was no longer a little 11-year-old boy.
Now, this 11-year-old boy would become extremely strong.
He and Debbie, his fiancée, who was David's sister, would go off fishing and they'd have a good time. But this kid, at 18 years old at the time, would stay awake all night long and then go to work the next morning. But he made a fatal mistake. One night he said, and he screamed at these devils, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone."
Uh-oh.
Well, he got his wish.
He provoked him.
He challenged the demonic.
On July 3rd, 1980, 11-year-old David Glatzel woke up screaming about a black beast-looking man. David wasn't the kind of kid who watched scary movies.
Right.
And he sure wasn't one to make up stories or have such vivid nightmares. And this one really shook him up.
Scary movies.
His whole demeanor changed. The once happy-go-lucky kid became quiet and nervous.
Like that. Sometimes I have bad
David's
dreams,
sister, Debbie, asked her fiancé to stay with the family for a while just to help out David.
Right.
That fiancé was Arne Johnson. Things didn't get better. David had more nightmares of the Beast Man, who promised to take the kid's soul.
Oh my
Odd
gosh.
scratches and bruises began to appear on David.
Now you
The
see
injuries
that's when it
seemed
gets
to
bad.
happen while David slept. Odd noises came from the attic, but Arne couldn't find any reasonable answer for them. Worst of all, David began to see the Beast Man while he was awake, claiming that the monster would appear as an old man with a white beard, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, sitting in the corner staring at him. With no one else to turn to, the Glatzel family turned to their church. A priest came to the home and
Possessions is so
which
crazy.
seemed to piss off the Beast Man.
Yeah.
The sounds in the attic became louder. David's dreams and daytime visions increased. David began to hiss at his family and speak in multiple voices.
Hiss and
he
speak
started
in
to
multiple
quote Paradise
voices.
Lost, a book that I don't see any 11-year-old reading.
Right.
During the night, someone would have to stay up and watch David, who would wake up every 30 minutes, sometimes having seizures.
Poor thing, he
to
was
put it
being
bluntly,
tormented, man.
things really suck for the Glatzels.
I hear possession.
Unsure of what to do,
for what it is.
the priest reached out to a kindly couple who had helped
so
out in
hard
the
on a
past,
person.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Exorcism too.
The Warrens took the short trip to Brookfield so that Ed could speak with David. It became clear to the Warrens that David was possessed. According to Lorraine, the Warrens, along with 4 priests, held 3 exorcisms to free David from the hold of 43 demons. During one of the exorcisms, Arne Johnson made a tragic mistake. He taunted the demons inside David, going so far to claim that the monsters were too frightened to try and enter him. When the exorcism was over, the Warrens called the Brookfield police and suggested that they keep an eye on Arne. Arne was well liked and hard working all the way up to that
trying
day.
to tell the police about demons?
That day he challenged whatever was inside David. According to Debbie, Arne would go into trances where he would growl at nothing really and claim to see the Beast Man. When he would come out of the trances,
poor guy,
Arne wouldn't remember any of it. Arne started to get into trouble with the police.
Yeah.
Then came February 16th, 1981. Arne called out of work, choosing instead to spend it with Debbie and his sister Wanda at their job at the kennel.
All right.
Debbie's cousin Mary was also spending the day at the kennel. It was President's Day and school was closed.
Okay.
As the four were at the kennel, Alan Bono showed up and took them all out to lunch at the local bar.
Right on.
Arne and Alan were drinking serious amount of alcohol at lunch.
That's
then
not
everyone
good.
returned to the kennel. There was an uneasiness
At
about the
lunch?
atmosphere.
Sheesh.
An argument between Arne and Alan broke out. Arne started
Alcohol
to growl and
does that
hiss.
sometime.
Debbie
Growling
feared
and
the worst
hissing
and tried to
ain't
get
good.
Wanda and Mary out of the room. Alan was faster. He grabbed Mary and refused to let go, and she's 9 years old. That was when Arne pulled out a knife and stabbed Alan Bono in
Oh,
the stomach,
Gosh, man.
pulling the knife up and creating an incision reaching Alan's heart.
God.
Arne
dang.
then stabbed Alan Bono a few more times before leaving the scene. As November
he wasn't
1980
just trying to
started,
stab him, he was trying to
things
kill him.
seemed okay. David's parents took him to a psychiatrist and their family physician. David was, according to the doctors, a normal kid with a slight learning disability,
Right.
though he still had trouble sleeping. Debbie and Arne moved into their own apartment, rented out by Alan Bono. But Arne had changed. In all his 19 years, Arne had never gotten into trouble.
Right.
He was the typical good guy. He even dropped out of high school to get a full-time job to help out his mom.
God.
He even bought his mom a car. When it came time for the trial, the Warrens appeared in court and provided evidence for the judge and jurors to prove that there was some type of demonic activity going on.
How did
They explained to
prove
the
that?
court that Arne had become demonically possessed after the exorcism. But that evidence wasn't enough in the courts because Arne was convicted of first-degree manslaughter.
Well, yeah. I mean,
He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he only served 5 years of his sentence.
so it was like insanity.
Arne and Debbie got married after he was released and are still together to this day. And up until now, Arne has never had another episode.
Wow. So, you know, a lot of people, when it comes to possession and stuff, people tend to think about things like mental disabilities, you know, handicaps, things of that nature. The temporary insanity that is perceived for non-believers has long been challenged by, you know, everybody on the religious side or the supernatural believers, for instance, and vice versa. But using demonic possession as a reason of murdering another individual in court would never stand up, right? the separation of church and state, all that stuff. It's unfortunate that these people are traumatized by whatever ails them, whether it's mental or supernatural or a combination of the two. It's still terrible, man. Like I said, these movies, I got the chills the whole time listening to that story because, you know, this poor boy was just being tormented by whatever it was that was tormenting him and driving him to do crazy stuff. It's got to be rough on them and the family, man. God, if you've never watched these stories, guys, get into them. As far as the breakdown that we just got from Nightmare Files, good job, bro. Thank you very much for the recommendation and for letting me react to your videos. Guys, make sure to subscribe to Nightmare Files as well as check these videos out that I think you'll love. Thanks so much for watching. As always, this is Zueljin signing off. We'll see you next time.